Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we are traveling to the small towns scattered around Winnipeg, Manitoba, where the prairie silence hides secrets darker than the winter nights. These are not campfire tales or folklore passed down through generations. These are 7 true accounts from places like Selkirk, Stonewall, and Beaujour, where ordinary people encountered something that shattered their sense of safety forever. Some faced horrors that crawled from the past. Others stumbled into nightmares that defy all logical explanation. And a few discovered that the most terrifying monsters are the ones who walk among us in broad daylight. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Manitoba's forgotten towns, where the wind carries whispers of the disappeared and every locked door tells a story of survival. My name is Daniel Mercer, and this happened when I was 32, living alone in a dying prairie town outside Dauphin, Manitoba. If you've never lived in a place like that, understand this first. Silence there isn't peaceful, it's watchful. I worked maintenance for the grain elevator, night shifts mostly, and lived in a small rental house at the edge of town where the road turned into nothing but fields and drifting snow. After my divorce, isolation felt safer than people, or at least I thought it did. That winter, a storm hit harder than anything I'd seen. Snow stacked against doors like concrete. Power lines went down. Roads vanished. The town radio warned us to stay inside. No emergency services until morning. That night, around 2:17 a.m., I heard the knock. Not loud, not urgent. 3 slow taps. I froze. Nobody walks in a storm like that. Nobody knocks politely at that hour. I checked my phone. No service. Through the frosted window, I could see nothing but white wind. Then came the knock again. 3 taps, same rhythm. And a thought crept in that still makes my stomach tighten. Whoever it was knew I was awake. I didn't answer. I stood there in the dark, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might give me away. The knocking stopped, and for a moment, I convinced myself it had been ice hitting the siding. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, crunching, circling the house, not panicked, not rushed. Whoever was outside wasn't afraid of the storm. I moved toward the kitchen window, careful not to make a sound. I wiped a small circle in the frost with my sleeve and leaned in. That's when I saw him. A man stood near my shed, facing the house. No coat, no hat, just a thin shirt clinging to his body, stiff with ice. His skin looked gray, almost bluish, like he'd been dead for hours. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening. And then, without warning, his eyes snapped directly toward the window. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The power chose that moment to die completely, plunging the house into total darkness. The knocking started again. This time, it wasn't polite. It was impatient. And between the knocks, I heard something else. A voice, low and hoarse, whispering my name. I backed away from the door, every instinct screaming not to respond. The whispering outside wasn't loud, but it carried through the walls like it was already inside my head. He kept saying my name, slow and deliberate, as if tasting it. I grabbed the fireplace poker, useless, but better than nothing, and locked myself in the hallway between the bedroom and bathroom. The footsteps resumed, heavier now. I heard them stop at the back door. Then the sound of fingers dragging across the siding, testing, searching. My mind raced through possibilities. Hypothermia, a drunk, someone lost. But none of those explained how calm he sounded or how he knew my name. A loud thump shook the doorframe. Snow fell from the ceiling vents. I crouched, holding my breath. And that's when I noticed the footprints. Dark, wet shapes forming beneath the hallway window, appearing one by one as if someone were pacing directly outside. Then the radio crackled to life in the living room, even though the power was out. Static gave way to a distorted voice repeating a weather warning from hours earlier. Beneath it, faint but unmistakable, came another sound. Breathing. Not from outside, from somewhere inside the house. I spun toward the living room. Poker raised, heart slamming so hard it hurt. The breathing grew louder, uneven, like someone struggling to pull air through frozen lungs. I stepped forward slowly, each floorboard creaking like a gunshot. The radio sat on the table, its dial turning by itself. Click, click, click. Each movement matched the rhythm of the breathing. I whispered, "Who's there?" The dumbest thing I could have said. The breathing stopped instantly. Silence pressed in so thick it felt physical. Then, from right behind me, a voice spoke clearly for the first time. I knocked first. I turned too fast, slipped on the rug and hit the floor hard. The room was empty. No footprints, no man. Just the radio, now silent. Suddenly, headlights swept across the window. A snowplow roared past, breaking the spell. I scrambled outside barefoot, screaming for help. The driver nearly ran me over before stopping. By morning, the storm had passed. Police found no tracks leading to my house, only one set leaving the shed, ending abruptly in the middle of the yard. Weeks later, an old-timer at the diner told me about a farmhand who froze to death decades ago after knocking on doors during storms. Everyone who let him in disappeared. I moved away that spring. But sometimes, during winter storms, I still hear 3 slow knocks in my dreams. I tried to convince myself it was over. New town, new apartment, no snowdrifts swallowing doors. Winnipeg felt loud enough to drown out memories. But fear doesn't disappear, it waits. The first knock came in November. 3 slow taps on my apartment door at 2:17 a.m. I checked the hallway camera feed on my phone. Empty corridor. No footsteps, no movement. Still, the knock came again, exactly the same rhythm as before. I didn't open the door. I never opened the door. Over the next weeks, small things followed me. Frost formed on the inside of my windows, even when the heat was running. My radio, something I hadn't plugged in, crackled to life at night, repeating old weather alerts from rural Manitoba counties I no longer lived in. Sleep became impossible. Every time a storm rolled through the city, I felt watched again. Not hunted, waited for. One night, I dreamed I was back in that house near Dauphin. The man stood inside this time, dripping meltwater onto the floor. He smiled, teeth chattering, and said, "You still haven't let me finish." I woke up gasping. On my phone was a missed voicemail. No number, no timestamp, just heavy breathing, and 3 slow taps recorded at the end. I finally went back. People don't understand that need. The need to face something just to prove it didn't follow you because you ran. I drove to Dauphin in early December before the heavy snow returned. The house was still there, boarded up now, sagging like it was tired of standing. Inside, the air smelled stale and cold. No furniture, no radio, just silence and dust. In the hallway, I found something carved into the wall beside the bedroom door. 3 lines, not scratches, not random. Tally marks. Below them, carved deep enough to splinter the wood, were the words, "Let me in." Behind the house, near where the shed used to be, the snow hadn't settled evenly. A human-shaped depression lay frozen into the ground, as if someone had stood there for years without moving. As I turned to leave, I heard it again. 3 slow knocks, not on the door, on the inside of my skull. I don't sleep through storms anymore. I don't live alone. And if someone knocks at night, no matter how polite, no matter how cold they sound, I never answer. Because some things aren't asking for shelter. They're waiting for permission. Winter dragged on, and so did the haunting reminders. I tried rationalizing everything. Maybe it was stress, isolation, a lingering memory of trauma. But deep down, I knew what I saw was real. Nothing rational could explain the gray figure, the precise timing, or how it knew my name. One night, I returned home to find the apartment door slightly ajar. I hadn't left it unlocked. Inside, the temperature had dropped dramatically, frost forming in sharp crystals along the baseboards. The radio sat on the table, dial twitching again. 3 taps came from inside the room this time, each punctuated by a low breath that seemed almost alive. I froze, my hands trembling. The sound wasn't outside anymore. It followed me from the door, creeping toward my bedroom. My heart hammered, yet a part of me wanted to see it, to confront it. As I inched forward, the lights flickered and a shadow stretched across the hallway. It was him. No coat, dripping cold, staring silently, waiting. I ran, not calmly, not safely. I threw open the stairwell door and bolted down 3 flights, not daring to look back. The tapping followed, softer now, like it had receded but hadn't disappeared. That night, I realized it wasn't a visitor seeking warmth. It was a pattern, a predator that thrived in storms, waiting for people who thought isolation would protect them. Spring finally arrived, but the terror didn't fade with the thaw. Even without snow, I could sense it watching. Footsteps echoed outside my apartment building at odd hours, the faintest tapping on pipes or windows. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that maybe I had brought the fear with me and projected it onto the empty city streets. One afternoon, I decided to check the old family records at a nearby library. While researching, I found a shocking notice. Years ago, a man named Henry Kessler had died during a winter storm near Dauphin. He was a transient farmhand, wandering from house to house, knocking politely, asking for shelter. No one saw him in time. Some neighbors vanished that same winter. The details mirrored my nightmares exactly. Dates, behaviors, even the pattern of the knocks matched perfectly. I left the library shaking. Knowledge didn't make me safer. It made me a target who had survived longer than expected. That evening, as I closed my blinds, I noticed condensation forming in the exact shape of a face on the window. 3 slow taps sounded on the glass. My name whispered again, hoarse and wet. I understood finally that he wasn't gone. He was bound to the storm, to the places where the snow piled high and doors were locked. And one day I knew he would come to finish what he started. The next winter, I tried to prepare. Every window sealed, every door bolted, every light left on. I bought a white noise machine, alarms, cameras, anything to drown out or record the knocks. And yet, it didn't matter. One night, during a blizzard that blanketed the city in white, I heard it again. 3 slow knocks on my apartment door. My blood ran cold. I didn't even look at the peephole. The knocks continued, methodical, patient. Then, from behind me, a soft scrape on the floorboards, like fingernails dragging across wood. My camera feed showed nothing. The city outside remained silent, except for the storm. My rational mind screamed this was impossible, that I was alone. I crouched by the bedroom door, gripping the poker. The temperature dropped sharply. My breath became visible in the dark. A whisper followed. My name, elongated, drawn out, closer than ever. I wanted to flee, to scream, but my legs felt frozen. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the door handle rattled violently. I realized, with terror, that he didn't need to enter physically. He could exist wherever fear allowed him. I understood fully then. The storm wasn't the danger. He was. I moved out the following morning. I abandoned everything in that apartment. The snowstorm had ended, streets were clear, but my fear hadn't thawed. I sold my car, left the city, and rented a small house near a lake in southern Manitoba, hoping distance would erase what had followed me. For weeks, silence returned. I slept. I ate. I began to believe I had finally escaped. And then, one evening, during a gentle snowfall, I heard it, not at my door, but behind the living room window. 3 taps on the glass. My name whispered so softly, I almost didn't catch it. I froze, heart pounding. The snow obscured the figure, but I knew it was there. I would never open the window. I would never invite it in. Some forces aren't bound by geography. Some spirits, some men, linger because they need something you'll never give: permission. And in storms, in cold, in silence, they find a way to remind you of that fact. I live now with the memory and the fear. And every winter, as snow piles outside my door, I hear 3 slow taps, and I know I am not alone. My name is Clara Dawson, and this happened when I was 28, working the night shift at an old grain elevator outside Brandon, Manitoba. I loved the quiet, the endless hum of machinery, the way the metal walls seemed to swallow sound. At least, I used to. The elevator had been abandoned for years before the company reopened it, but traces of its old life remained. Rusted catwalks, dark storage bins, and a basement no one entered without a flashlight. My co-workers warned me about it, stories about people disappearing or claiming to see things move, but I laughed them off. Ghost stories were for campers, not real life. One night, while doing my rounds, I noticed a shadow moving near the top catwalk. I froze, assuming it was a trick of the lights or my imagination. But then I heard a faint scraping sound, metal on metal, high above. I called out. Nothing. Just the echo of my own voice bouncing through the cavernous interior. My flashlight flickered, leaving patches of darkness so deep it felt alive. Then I heard it. A whisper, soft and sibilant, saying, "Get out." I laughed nervously. Machinery can make strange noises, right? But the whisper repeated, closer now. I realized I wasn't alone. I tried to focus on my tasks, sweeping the metal platforms and checking machinery. But the whispering followed me. Every turn of a walkway revealed shadows that shouldn't be there. Elongated, stretching across the walls, vanishing the moment I looked directly. At first, I told myself it was stress. The isolation, the night shift, the constant drone of the machines. It could play tricks on anyone. But then the footsteps started. Slow, deliberate, and echoing through the empty bins. They weren't mine. I had been alone for hours. I climbed the spiral staircase to inspect the upper floors, flashlight trembling in my hand. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, and the metal railings were slick with condensation. I paused when I saw a figure crouched near the catwalk railing. A man, or something like one, all black with no distinguishable features, staring downward. I froze. It didn't move. It didn't blink. But I felt it watching me, measuring me. The whisper returned, this time clearly my name. "Clara." I ran, not thinking, not looking back. But the shadow followed. Every corner I turned, every floor I descended, It was there, always just at the edge of my vision. That night, I understood the elevator had a life of its own, and it had claimed something. Long before I arrived, I called my supervisor the next morning, voice shaking so badly I almost couldn't speak. He laughed at first, said I probably slipped or imagined things in the shadows. But I could hear the doubt in his own words. He had worked there for years and never mentioned seeing or feeling anything unusual. I returned to the elevator the next night, determined to prove to myself that it was all imagination. The night air bit at my face as I unlocked the massive doors, and the faint hum of the machinery greeted me like a living thing. I tried to focus on the work, checking grain levels, inspecting bins, recording maintenance logs. But the whisper came back, soft at first, then urgent, bouncing off the steel walls. "You shouldn't be here." I froze mid-step. Shadows seemed to gather at the edges of the room, moving against the grain of the light. Something shifted near the top catwalk, too quick, too fluid to be human. I realized with a sinking feeling that this place had a memory, and it didn't want anyone disturbing it. Every instinct told me to leave. But curiosity, stupid, dangerous curiosity, kept me moving upward, toward the sound of scraping metal that was too deliberate to ignore. The higher I climbed, the heavier the air became. My flashlight flickered again, casting brief glimpses of shapes that weren't supposed to be there. Dark figures huddled in corners, or maybe just tricks of the metal and shadows. But I could feel them. Eyes on me, watching my every move, calculating, patient. Suddenly, I heard footsteps running parallel to mine. I spun, but the catwalk was empty. Only the echo remained, taunting, mocking. Then a deep metallic clang rang out from one of the grain bins below, followed by the whisper, "You can't leave." Panic surged. I started down the spiral staircase, trying to move faster than my legs wanted to. The railings felt wet, sticky like something had touched them. The shadows stretched along the walls, twisting, reaching toward me. I thought I was imagining it, until I saw my own shadow detach from the wall. It moved independently, crouching and lunging, mimicking my fear in a distorted way. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't machinery. Something in the elevator didn't want me to leave. And it was learning me, shaping me into its own shadow. I barely made it back to the ground floor, heart hammering, and slammed the doors shut behind me. But I knew, as soon as the night returned, so would the elevator, and its shadows. I tried taking days off, convincing myself I needed distance. But the elevator called me back. I received strange messages from my own company phone. Texts I never typed, images of empty bins, shadows captured mid-motion. At first, I thought it was a prank. But the timestamps matched nights I wasn't even scheduled to work. The following night, I returned. The doors groaned open, welcoming me into darkness that felt alive. My flashlight beam cut through dust and mist, but the shapes didn't scatter. They moved with me, following every step. I climbed the main catwalk, notebook in hand, trying to document everything. That's when I saw the first mark. A long scratch along the railing, deep enough to draw blood, with tiny claw-like indentations. Below, on the metal floor, shadows gathered unnaturally. They weren't cast by anything I could see. Then I heard a soft, almost affectionate sigh. Finally, you came. I froze. The shadows shifted, crawling along the walls as if savoring my fear. Something brushed against my leg. My flashlight fell, rolling across the catwalk. Its beam caught a face, pale, hollow, expressionless, emerging from the darkness above. I stumbled back, heart pounding, adrenaline surging, knowing that this was no longer a game. The elevator had always been alive, and now it had noticed me. I tried calling for help, but my phone showed no signal. The city was miles away, but the elevator's presence seemed to bend reality. No calls, no light, only shadows. Panic gripped me as I realized leaving wasn't just difficult. It was impossible. I ran toward the staircase, but each step felt like walking through water, weighted and slow. The shadows followed, writhing along the walls, whispering my name, coaxing, mocking. The closer I got to the ground floor, the more tangible the cold became. Frost forming along the metal railings. A shape leapt from the catwalk above, landing silently, crouched and still, its eyes hollow voids staring directly at me. My instincts screamed to flee, but my legs refused. I stumbled backward into a storage bin, knocking over bags of grain that exploded in clouds of dust. The whispering intensified, now a chorus of voices layered together. "Stay, join us." The grain dust made it hard to breathe, and I thought I might pass out. But I forced myself upright, running through the corridors, blindly swinging open doors, ignoring the scraping and shadows that licked my heels. Finally, I burst out into the frigid night, lungs burning, heart hammering. The elevator loomed behind me, silent, inert. But I knew better. It was waiting. The next time, it wouldn't let me leave so easily. Weeks passed, and I refused to return. I thought avoidance might protect me. But the elevator had a way of reaching out. It wasn't through doors or windows. It was through the shadows in my apartment, stretching across the walls at night, twisting into shapes I didn't recognize. One evening, I found a small pile of grain on my floor. I hadn't brought any into my apartment. It formed a neat trail from the corner to my bedroom door, leading toward the window. I froze, heart hammering. The whisper returned, faint but insistent. "Come back." I tried ignoring it. I stayed up all night, flashlight in hand, watching the shadows creep across the walls. They weren't random. They moved with purpose, converging on me, shaping themselves, learning my habits. The following week, I received a package at my door. Inside, a scrap of metal from the elevator, rusted and cold, wrapped in a layer of frost with claw marks etched deep into it. I didn't touch it. I didn't call anyone. The shadows whispered louder that night, circling me as I lay in bed. Every corner of the room seemed to pulse with life. And I understood with certainty that the elevator didn't forgive absence. It waited, watching, remembering, preparing. I realized then that I had become part of it, whether I returned or not. I couldn't sleep. Every night, I felt its presence. The whispers, the creeping shadows, the faint rustle of metal against the floor. I became a ghost in my own home, walking on edge, avoiding corners, covering mirrors. The elevator didn't care about distance. It only cared that I knew it existed. One night, desperate to end the torment, I decided to return once more. Maybe confronting it head-on would release me. I drove through freezing roads, the city lights fading behind me, until the elevator loomed ahead, dark and foreboding against the starless sky. Inside, silence greeted me, but not the emptiness I expected. The shadows were there, thick and suffocating, curling along the walls, following the rhythms of the machinery. I could feel them wrapping around my senses, pressing into my thoughts. A whisper called my name from every corner at once. Stay. Stay forever. I climbed the catwalk slowly, hands trembling, aware that any sudden movement could provoke whatever lingered. The shadows didn't need to strike. they were patient hunters, learning my every fear, every hesitation. I realized that this wasn't a place I could leave unscathed. The elevator didn't kill. It consumed slowly, mentally, emotionally, until your soul matched its shadows. And then I saw movement above. A shape crouched, ready, observing, waiting for me to falter. The final climb was like walking through my own fear. Every step on the catwalk creaked loudly, echoing off the metal walls, mingling with whispers that now sounded almost human. They repeated my name over and over, each syllable stretching into a warning I couldn't ignore. I reached the upper platform and froze. The shadow crouched there, motionless, but its presence was suffocating. I raised my flashlight, and for the first time, the shape responded, not by moving, but by splitting, multiplying into dozens of shifting silhouettes, each one an exact mirror of me, all reaching toward me, reflecting my terror. The whispering became screaming in my mind. "Join us. You belong." I stumbled backward, heart hammering. My hands grasped the railing, trying to steady myself. But the shadows twisted upward, climbing the supports, pressing in like cold fingers. I realized then that the elevator wasn't just a building, it was a living trap, feeding on fear, growing stronger each time someone succumbed to it. I had a choice: stay and become another shadow, or run. I jumped, landing hard on the lower floor, chest burning, adrenaline searing through me. The shadows receded, but I felt them lingering, embedded in the steel, waiting for the next night shift, the next unwary soul. I ran straight out of the elevator, ignoring the blizzard that had suddenly picked up, promising myself I'd never return. I quit my job the next day and never returned to the elevator. I tried to convince myself it was over. But the shadows followed me in dreams, stretching across walls, creeping along floors, whispering my name in the dead of night. Months later, I received an anonymous package. A piece of rusted metal from the elevator, etched with deep claw marks. I didn't open it. I didn't want to know if it carried a piece of what had haunted me. Even now, when I pass by grain elevators in rural Manitoba, I can feel the air thicken, the shadows stretch, as if watching, waiting. The elevator isn't just a building. It's a predator, patient and cunning. I know I survived because it wanted me to fear, not because I was brave. The shadows don't forgive. They only observe, learning, waiting for those who wander too close to their steel and darkness. I tell my story now to warn others. Never underestimate abandoned machinery. Never ignore whispers in the dark. And never, ever believe you are alone in places that hold memories of the lost. Some shadows are patient. Some shadows are hungry. And some will follow you, long after the lights go out. My name is Ethan Ward, and this happened when I was 24. Backpacking through the forests near Pinawa, Manitoba. I had always loved the wilderness, the quiet, the scent of pine, the sense of being untethered from the world. But some woods have a way of remembering, and the whispering pines certainly did. I arrived at dusk, setting up camp near a small clearing just off a rarely used trail. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and fallen needles, the sky fading to a deep indigo. As I pitched my tent, I noticed something strange. The wind wasn't moving the branches evenly. It was as if the trees themselves were shifting, leaning subtly toward the clearing. That first night, I heard the whispers. Soft, unintelligible, carried on the wind. I thought it was the forest settling, my mind playing tricks. But the whispers repeated, forming words I almost understood. Stay with us. I shrugged it off, attributing it to exhaustion and isolation. yet the feeling of being watched never left me. The forest seemed alive, stretching taller, darker, enclosing me in a cage of pine and shadow. I tried to sleep, but even in the quiet, the whispers persisted, layering over one another like voices carried through generations, reaching for anyone foolish enough to wander alone. The second night, the whispers grew louder. I woke to the sound of footsteps circling my tent, soft but deliberate. My heart raced, but I peeked outside, flashlight in hand. The clearing was empty. The pine needles were undisturbed. And yet, the feeling of being observed was overwhelming, pressing into my chest like the trees themselves were leaning in closer. I followed the faint sound of rustling deeper into the forest, convinced someone or something was playing a prank. The further I walked, the darker it became, the canopy swallowing the last light. The whispers intensified, now forming fragments of sentences I could understand. "You shouldn't be here. We are hungry." I froze, realizing I wasn't on the trail anymore. The forest seemed to have shifted while I slept. Paths that should have led back to my tent now wound into unfamiliar territory. Every tree looked the same, twisted and gnarled, branches reaching like claws. I ran back toward the clearing, only to find it empty. My tent was gone, replaced by more towering pines. A figure moved in the shadows, tall, thin, almost blending with the trees. It didn't walk. It drifted, silent, following me, always keeping the distance just enough to never fully reveal itself. Panic set in. I understood then. The forest was not just a backdrop. It was alive, and it had claimed me as its own. I stumbled blindly through the forest, branches slapping my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. The whispers followed, twisting around the rustling of pine needles. Each syllable seemed to burrow into my mind. "You belong here. Forever." I tripped over a fallen log and landed hard, scraping my hands on the rough bark. When I looked up, the forest had changed again. The clearing, my supposed refuge, was gone. In its place, an endless sea of dark trees stretched as far as I could see, each one leaning closer, the shadows between them shifting like breathing creatures. I tried to call for help, but my phone displayed no signal. My rational mind screamed at me to turn back, to climb a hill, to escape the unnatural maze. But every direction led deeper into the same dark woods. Then I saw them, figures in the trees, slender, faceless, blending perfectly with the bark, their limbs unnaturally long, reaching down toward me. They didn't move, and yet I felt their gaze, piercing, calculating, hungry. I ran again, zigzagging blindly, branches tearing at my jacket, whispering voices accelerating in pitch. The forest had claimed me. The pines weren't just trees, they were sentient, predators feeding on my fear, guiding me towards something I couldn't yet see. I slowed, trying to think, trying to find a pattern in the chaos. That's when I noticed it. Small symbols etched into tree bark, faint and weathered, but deliberate. Triangles, circles, marks forming patterns, all pointing toward a massive pine at the center of the forest. Compelled, terrified, I followed the marks. The forest seemed to hum, the whispers now harmonizing into a chant, echoing through the treetops. Join us, join us. Every step toward the central tree felt heavier, like the ground itself resisted me. Finally, I reached it. The massive pine towered above, its trunk impossibly wide, roots twisting like snakes. Shadows clung to its base, and the whispers were deafening, almost physical, vibrating in my chest. I could feel them beckoning, daring me to step closer. A figure detached from the shadows, a woman, pale, featureless, moving fluidly like mist. She raised an arm, pointing at a hollow in the tree, and I understood instinctively. Whatever had been in that forest for centuries lived inside, feeding, waiting, collecting those who dared enter. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like lead. Fear had become paralysis, fascination, and obsession all at once. The forest held me, whispering, testing my will. I realized the only way out might be to obey, or become another shadow in the pines. I forced myself to step closer to the hollow, heart pounding so hard I feared it would burst. The whispers twisted into words I could almost comprehend, urging me, promising secrets, knowledge, and safety, if I only obeyed. I tried to resist, telling myself it was a trap. But the forest seemed to shrink around me, bending branches and shadows toward the tree as if it were alive. A sudden movement made me spin. More figures emerged from between the pines, slender and featureless, but unmistakably humanoid. Their presence was cold, heavy, like the temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The whispers carried their intentions. They wanted me. Wanted my fear, my mind, my will. I fell to my knees, shaking, realizing I had underestimated the forest. It wasn't merely haunted, it was intelligent, calculating, a predator that had existed for generations, feeding on the unwary. The woman from earlier drifted toward me, beckoning with her elongated fingers. I tried to run, but roots sprang from the ground, wrapping around my ankles. The trees leaned closer, groaning, whispering, closing in. My mind screamed for escape, but my body was paralyzed with terror. The forest wanted me to understand. Survival wasn't enough. You could only leave by giving it what it demanded, or never leave at all. I struggled violently, ripping at the roots, but they were unnaturally strong, almost alive. The whispers became a roar in my head, echoing through my thoughts, pulling me toward the hollow. My limbs burned with exertion, yet I could not free myself. Desperation pushed me to act. I swung my flashlight at the nearest figure. The light didn't harm it, but it made it recoil slightly, shivering in the glow. That gave me the edge I needed. I twisted violently, breaking a few roots, and stumbled backward. The shadows recoiled, hissing, as though surprised by my resistance. I didn't pause. I ran blindly through the forest, branches scratching my face and arms, the whispering chasing me, wrapping around my mind. Every tree I passed seemed to bend toward me, blocking paths, forcing me deeper. Yet I somehow found a path leading out. Finally, I broke through to the edge of the woods, gasping, lungs burning, the night sky wide above me, free of shadows, at least for a moment. But the forest didn't release me entirely. The whispers faded, replaced by a promise carried on the wind. We will wait. We always wait. I understood then that escaping physically was not enough. The forest had marked me. Its shadows would follow patiently until I returned, or it claimed me completely. Days passed. But I couldn't shake the forest from my mind. Every shadow in my apartment seemed to stretch unnaturally. Every breeze through the window carried a faint whisper, reminding me of the pines. I tried to work, to socialize, to act normal. But the memory of the hollow and the faceless figures haunted my waking hours. One evening, I noticed small scratches along my doorframe, faint at first, but deliberate. I hadn't touched them. Panic gripped me. The whispers had returned, almost imperceptible at first. We are patient. We always return. I began seeing them in my dreams, moving between the trees, beckoning silently, always observing. Each night, the forest in my mind grew denser, darker, more suffocating. Even in waking life, could feel their presence pressing against me, testing me, stretching reality itself. Desperate, I tried to convince myself it was paranoia, a hallucination born of fear. But deep down, I knew better. The forest had claimed a piece of me. It wasn't just a place I had visited. It was a living, breathing entity, and I had trespassed. I understood now that the whispering pines were not bound by geography. Distance did not matter. Time did not matter. The forest had marked me, and it would wait, patiently, until the moment it could pull me back into its shadows. Weeks later, I returned to the edge of the forest, not fully conscious of why. Part of me knew I shouldn't, that I would regret it. But the whispers had grown persistent, gnawing at my thoughts like a constant pulse. Come back. We need you. I approached cautiously, the trees looming tall and menacing. The clearing from before was no longer visible, replaced by an impenetrable wall of pines. Shadows shifted between the trunks, and faint outlines of the faceless figures glided among the branches. My heart pounded. The air thickened, colder than it should have been for late autumn. A subtle vibration ran through the ground, almost like the forest itself was breathing. The woman from the hollow appeared at the tree line, her featureless face almost glowing in the muted light, beckoning silently. I froze. The whispers became a chorus, echoing across the canopy. Join us. Join us. I understood fully then. The forest wasn't merely alive. It was hungry. It had been feeding on trespassers for generations, collecting their fear, their energy, their essence. And I had become another thread woven into its dark tapestry. Always tethered, always observed, always marked. Even from the edge, I could feel its pull, patient, inexorable, as if the pines themselves were reaching for me, waiting for the moment I would succumb completely. I couldn't resist any longer. The whispers gnawed at my mind, filling every quiet moment, every shadowy corner of my thoughts. I stepped into the forest once more, my boots crunching on pine needles, heart hammering in terror and anticipation. The trees seemed to close in around me, leaning closer with every step. As I approached the central pine, I felt the shadows reach out, wrapping around my legs, tugging me toward the hollow. The faceless woman glided silently to my side, her presence overwhelming, her intent clear. The whispers intensified, now 1,000 voices layering into a deafening chorus. Join us. Become one of us. I tried to flee, but my legs refused. The forest had claimed more than my attention. It had seized control. The hollow in the central pine glowed faintly, shadows curling within like living smoke, beckoning. I realized the forest wanted more than fear. It wanted submission, my mind, my soul. I forced myself to step closer, trembling, feeling the cold tendrils of darkness brushing my arms, my neck. The whispers promised everything: knowledge, safety, power, but only if I embraced them fully. My resolve wavered, my sanity fraying as the forest pressed in, living, breathing, hungry. Every instinct screamed to fight. Yet a part of me wanted to surrender, to vanish into the shadows and become part of the forest forever. The final moment arrived with unbearable clarity. I stepped fully into the hollow, darkness swallowing me like a tidal wave. The shadows pressed close, twisting and writhing, whispering promises and threats simultaneously. I felt my consciousness tugged, stretched, bending toward the forest's will. For a fleeting second, I saw the faceless woman smile, a gesture both impossible and terrifying, as the shadows absorbed me into their folds. Then, instinct took over. A surge of sheer panic and defiance ripped through me. I bolted, claws of darkness brushing my back, roots wrapping my feet, whispering my name like a chorus of ghosts. I stumbled out of the forest, collapsing at the edge, lungs heaving, eyes wide, drenched in cold sweat. The whispers faded, leaving a ringing silence that echoed through my skull. The forest had relented for now, but its claim remained. I could feel it lingering, marking me, waiting. I never returned to Pinawa, but I know the forest will always be patient. It waits for those who wander too far, those who let curiosity outweigh caution. The whispering pines are eternal, hungry, and relentless. And even now, I can feel its pull in the wind, whispering promises I cannot forget. Some forests are alive. Some forests are patient. Some forests are hunters. And the whispering pines are all three. My name is Sophia Blake, and this happened when I was working as a summer camp counselor at Clearwater Lake, Manitoba. I had spent countless summers at camps before, but nothing prepared me for the darkness that lingered over this place. The lake itself looked serene by day, crystal clear water reflecting the pine trees and sky. But at night, it transformed. Mist rolled off the surface like ghostly fingers, and the shadows along the shoreline seemed to twist unnaturally. On my first night, I was walking along the docks, checking on the campers, when I heard faint whispers carried over the water. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then I saw it, a dark shape floating just beneath the surface, far too large and elongated to be any animal I knew. My heart pounded as it moved beneath the water without creating ripples, following me silently. I blinked, and it was gone. The campers were oblivious the next morning, laughing and playing as though nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something lived beneath the calm waters, watching, waiting, patient and intelligent. That night, the whispers returned, more insistent, curling around my thoughts. You shouldn't be here. Leave before it's too late. Something about Clearwater Lake wasn't natural, and I had unknowingly entered a predator's domain. The next night, I decided to investigate further. Despite my growing fear, I walked along the shoreline, flashlight in hand, each step crunching on gravel and damp earth. The mist thickened as I approached the center of the dock, curling around my feet and obscuring the water below. Suddenly, I saw ripples forming in the shape of a figure, just below the surface, moving deliberately toward me. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to convince myself it was a log or a shadow, but the movement was too smooth, too purposeful. A whisper carried over the water, soft but urgent. Do not turn your back. I froze. The water seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. My flashlight flickered, and when it returned, I caught a glimpse of something pale breaking the surface for just a moment. A humanoid silhouette with impossible, stretched limbs. I stumbled back, tripping over the dock's edge, and landed with a splash into the cold lake water. The shape beneath me vanished, but the whispers remained, echoing in my ears. I scrambled onto the dock, shivering violently, realizing that the lake was alive in a way no natural body of water should be. Something beneath Clearwater Lake was intelligent, patient, and it had noticed me. The following night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind over the water, sent shivers down my spine. The campers were asleep, oblivious, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the lake had followed me. I kept imagining the pale, elongated figure moving beneath the surface, silently observing, learning. Compelled by a mix of fear and fascination, I returned to the docks after midnight. The lake was still, the mist curling low across the water. My flashlight cut a thin line through the darkness, and I scanned the surface, heart hammering. Then I saw ripples forming in concentric circles, emanating from the center where no one had been. The whispers came again, clearer this time, almost articulate. "You cannot leave. We see everything." I took a cautious step back, feeling the wooden planks beneath me vibrate slightly, as though the lake itself were alive and breathing. Suddenly, a shape emerged fully, rising from the water. Its limbs were impossibly long, pale, with features twisted and indistinct. Its head tilted unnaturally, focusing directly on me. My body froze, terror rooting me to the dock as it drifted closer without making a sound, water cascading off its distorted form. I understood then that the lake wasn't just a place, it was a predator, and I was standing directly in its path. I stumbled backward along the dock, my flashlight trembling in my hands. The figure didn't chase. It simply drifted, moving with the patience and inevitability of a tide. My mind screamed at me to escape, but the dock seemed endless, stretching unnaturally, keeping me trapped with the lake's horror. The whispers intensified, layering into a chorus of indistinguishable voices, echoing in my ears. "Join us. Stay. Forever." The air grew colder, my breath fogging, each exhale carrying faint echoes of laughter, distorted and hollow. Desperate, I aimed my flashlight toward the water, hoping to break the illusion. The figure recoiled, shivering violently in the light. Yet the surface of the lake remained calm, almost taunting. I realized that physical action mattered little. This entity thrived on fear, anticipation, and submission. A sudden movement caught my eye. The water near the shoreline churned violently. More shapes emerged, smaller, writhing, humanoid, but malformed. Their eyes black voids staring at me from the depths. I realized the lake was not just one creature, but a gathering, a hive of entities bound together by the water, patient hunters waiting for trespassers. I backed toward the shore, heart racing, knowing instinctively that one wrong step would plunge me into the abyss. The lake wasn't merely haunted, it was alive, intelligent, and endlessly hungry. I knew I couldn't stay on the dock any longer. Every instinct screamed to run. Yet the mist around the lake seemed to thicken, slowing my movements, whispering threats that burrowed deep into my mind. The elongated figure and the smaller shapes drifted closer, moving silently across the water. Yet their presence felt physical, almost tangible. I jumped into the shallow water at the edge, hoping the shallows would give me leverage to escape. The cold bit through my clothes, but it was nothing compared to the suffocating dread that pressed down on me. The whispers followed, now overlapping, 1,000 voices urging me to surrender. The water calls. It knows you. I scrambled along the muddy shoreline, glancing back to see the figures gliding effortlessly across the lake's surface, advancing with deliberate purpose. Their movement was hypnotic, patient, like predators circling prey. Each shadow stretched unnaturally, bending light and reality itself, making it impossible to judge distance or speed. Finally, I reached the forest edge, pulling myself into the trees, my lungs burning, the whispers fading slightly, but never gone. I paused, realizing that even here, the lake's influence lingered. Every sound of water, every shadow among the pines, seemed to echo the lake's presence. Clearwater Lake didn't just exist. It waited, patient and intelligent, feeding on fear, claiming what it wanted, and marking those who dared approach. I thought I had escaped, but the lake's influence followed me relentlessly. That night, in my cabin, I heard faint splashes outside, echoes of rippling water, whispers twisting through the open window. You cannot hide. The water remembers. Sleep was impossible. Every dream pulled me back to the lake. The pale figure rising, countless smaller shapes writhing beneath the surface, all watching, waiting. I awoke drenched in sweat, shaking, convinced I could feel wet fingers brush against my arms. The next evening, compelled by a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, I returned to the docks, flashlight shaking in my hands. The lake looked deceptively calm, the mist curling gently across the surface. But I knew better. Beneath the water, unseen eyes followed my every movement. As I stepped closer, the water erupted, dozens of elongated shapes surging upward like a single coordinated entity. The whispers became screams, deafening and overwhelming. "Join us. Your fear feeds us." I stumbled back, nearly falling, realizing the lake had no patience left for hesitation. It had grown bolder, more aggressive, as if testing me, teaching me that proximity alone was punishment. I understood fully then. Clearwater Lake wasn't a place to visit. It was a living predator, patient for centuries, waiting for the moment it could claim another soul. The following night, I returned to the cabin, but sleep eluded me entirely. Every creak of the floorboards, every ripple of water from the lake felt like a predator circling, reminding me that escape was temporary. The whispers had grown persistent, filling my thoughts even in the daylight, twisting around my sanity. "You belong to us. The water never forgets." I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was exhaustion, imagination, or hallucinations. But the scratches on the cabin door and the faint, wet footprints leading toward the forest told me otherwise. The lake had followed me, marking its territory and reminding me that it was patient, but relentless. Desperate for answers, I ventured to the dock one last time, flashlight trembling in my hands. The water was still, eerily calm, yet I could sense something moving beneath. Shadows shifted beneath the surface, black shapes sliding like ink through water, observing, calculating. I shivered as the elongated figure emerged again, its limbs stretching impossibly, head tilting unnaturally, eyes, if they could be called that, fixing on me with a knowing, patient intelligence. I realized fully then, the lake didn't just feed on fear. It learned, adapted, grew stronger with each encounter. Every soul who wandered too close added to its knowledge, its hunger, its power. I had survived, barely. But Clearwater Lake had already begun the process of claiming me, threading its influence into my mind, waiting for the moment I would return. I knew I couldn't stay, but I couldn't leave either. The whispers followed me relentlessly, now echoing in my own thoughts, even when I was miles from the lake. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pale figure, the writhing shapes beneath the water, the mist curling like ghostly fingers reaching for me. One evening, I saw my reflection in a puddle, and for a moment, it wasn't me. My eyes were black voids, my limbs elongated, distorted, and behind me I could see faint ripples forming in the reflection of a lake that didn't exist there. Panic surged. I realized then that the lake's reach extended beyond geography. It had touched me, marking me, embedding its presence in my mind and body. I returned to the forest edge once more, not physically, but in dreams, visions, and fleeting shadows in my peripheral vision. The lake waited patiently, always observing, whispering, reminding me that no matter how far I ran, its influence had claimed a part of me. Even now, when I hear a soft ripple of water or a whisper in the wind, I feel the lake's hunger. Clearwater Lake is patient, intelligent, and eternal. It doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive. And one day, it will claim me fully. I couldn't resist any longer. The lake's whispers had wormed their way into my thoughts, pulling me back night after night. I found myself standing at the edge of the dock, flashlight in hand, heart hammering in terror and anticipation. The water was unnaturally still, reflecting the pale moonlight like glass, and I knew what awaited me beneath the surface. Suddenly, the water erupted. The elongated figure rose fully, pale limbs dripping with water, gliding toward me with unnatural grace. From beneath, dozens of smaller shapes surged, writhing like a tide of shadows, their black void eyes locked on me. The whispers became a deafening chorus. Join us. Surrender. Become part of the water. Panic surged, but I forced myself to stay calm. I realized that the lake fed not only on fear, but on hesitation. Every step back would embolden it. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and stared directly at the main figure, refusing to show weakness. For a brief, terrifying moment, everything froze. The water, the shapes, the whispers. I felt the lake testing me, probing for submission, weighing my will against its own. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I prepared to confront the predator that had haunted my mind and body for weeks. The lake was patient, but patience has limits. I made a choice. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I stared into the void black eyes of the main figure, forcing myself to meet its gaze, refusing to give it fear to feed on. Slowly, the shapes beneath the water began to recoil, as if my defiance startled them. The whispers softened, almost hesitant. Why? Resist? I stepped backward deliberately, one foot at a time, never turning my back. The pale figure followed, gliding across the surface like liquid shadow. But I kept my composure. Each step was agonizing, heart pounding, adrenaline surging, but I maintained control. Finally, I reached the forested shore. I didn't stop until the water was behind me. The whispers faded into a low, patient hum, promising they would wait. I realized then that I had survived not through strength or speed, but through willpower, refusing to submit to the lake's hunger. Clearwater Lake waits. It observes, it learns, and it claims those who falter. I left that place with my body intact, but my mind forever tethered to the water's pull. Every ripple, every whisper reminds me. Some predators do not strike immediately. They are patient, intelligent, and eternal. I will never return. But I know that one day it will call again. And next time, it may not allow escape. My name is Ethan Ward, and this happened during my final year of university when I took a photography project to explore abandoned places in Manitoba. One location stood out above all others: the old Brandon General Hospital, closed for decades after a series of mysterious deaths and unexplained disappearances. The local rumors called it haunted, but I was skeptical until I stepped inside. The building was a maze of crumbling hallways, peeling paint, and broken equipment scattered across the floors. The air was thick with dust and a faint, metallic smell that made my stomach turn. I walked cautiously with my camera, capturing the decaying interiors. When I first heard it, a low, dragging sound echoing from a corridor above. My rational mind insisted it was the building settling. But then I saw it. A shadow, taller than any human, stretching along the wall at the end of the hallway. It moved unnaturally, limbs elongated, flowing across the floor like liquid darkness. The air seemed to thicken around it, and a cold, almost tangible weight pressed against my chest. I froze, camera shaking in my hands, as the shadow followed my movements, not advancing, yet somehow always closer. The building, I realized, wasn't empty. It had a presence, patient and intelligent, feeding on fear waiting for someone to stumble too far. I tried to steady my breathing, convincing myself that it was a trick of the light. But every time I lifted my camera, the shadow's form seemed to distort, stretching, bending impossibly around corners and walls. I whispered to myself, "It's just a shadow. Just shadows." But the oppressive weight pressing on my chest disagreed. Curiosity pushed me further. I moved deeper into the hospital, flashlight cutting through the darkness. The whispering began, soft at first, unintelligible, then more distinct. "Leave. Now." I froze. There was no wind, no one else in the building, only that voice echoing off the concrete walls. I rounded a corner and entered what had once been the emergency room. Rusted gurneys were scattered, and broken tiles littered the floor. The shadow was there again, condensed in the center, almost human in shape. But its elongated arms reached unnaturally toward the ceiling, fingers twitching as if feeling the air itself. My skin crawled. I took a cautious step back, and the shadow recoiled slightly. But it didn't retreat. Instead, it seemed to study me, intelligent and patient, like a predator assessing its prey. I realized then that the hospital itself had become alive, the walls conduits for something ancient, waiting, and hungry. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the shadow. It didn't move like a human. Its form stretched and slithered along the walls, creeping toward the far end of the room, then retreating, almost playing with me. My heart raced, every instinct screaming to run. But some part of me was frozen in morbid fascination. As I took another step back, the whispering grew louder, layering into a chorus of disembodied voices echoing from every corner of the building. "You don't belong. You shouldn't be here." I felt the walls shift subtly, like the building itself was breathing, guiding me deeper into its bowels. I forced myself to lift the camera and take a few photos, the flash briefly illuminating the shadow in horrifying detail. Its elongated limbs seemed to writhe like smoke, and the faint outline of a face, or what could have been a face, twisted unnaturally. The air grew thick, and the metallic scent intensified. Then came a sound I couldn't ignore. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing down the corridor behind me. I spun, flashlight cutting through the darkness, but saw nothing. The shadow, however, reacted. It stretched toward the corridor, reaching, probing. I realized then that it wasn't just aware of my presence. It was hunting me, learning my movements, patient and calculating. Fear surged. I knew leaving the hospital wouldn't. I pressed myself against a wall, trying to stay as quiet as possible. But the building seemed alive with sound. Distant echoes of doors creaking, soft whispers, and the low hum of some unseen energy. The shadow lingered in the room, stretching, twisting, almost playful in its pursuit. I realized it was testing me, pushing boundaries. When I moved, it responded. When I froze, it paused, observing. My rational mind screamed at me to leave, but every corridor looked identical, and the hospital's layout seemed to shift subtly as I moved, guiding me toward its heart. I tried calling out, hoping another human voice would break the tension, but the words felt swallowed by the walls. The whispers intensified, layering into distinct, almost human sentences. "You cannot leave. The building is ours." A sudden draft blew through the broken windows, and I glimpsed the shadow in full this time. It was taller than I could imagine, limbs bending in ways that defied physics, a featureless face tilting toward me. My stomach churned as I understood. It wasn't just hunting me. It thrived on fear, feeding from my adrenaline, growing stronger the more I panicked. I knew then that survival depended not on running or screaming, but on staying calm, thinking carefully, and navigating a building that wasn't just abandoned. It was alive, intelligent, and utterly ruthless. I pressed forward, each step careful, flashlight trembling in my hands. The shadow followed, never rushing, always patient, gliding across the floor as if it owned the space. The whispers became louder, surrounding me, echoing through every hallway and room. "We see you. You cannot hide." I entered what had once been the intensive care unit. Rusted beds lined the walls, broken monitors flickered faintly in my flashlight's reflection, and the smell of old antiseptic lingered. The shadow emerged from the darkness at the far end of the room, limbs twisting impossibly, head tilting in unnatural angles. My stomach churned. I raised my camera again, hoping to capture proof, but the flash seemed to only provoke it. The shadow stretched higher, filling the room, tendrils of darkness flickering along the walls, pulsing with intelligence. It wasn't mindless. It was aware, learning, anticipating my next move. The whispers overlapped with soft scraping noises, like nails against metal, echoing through the empty ward. Every instinct told me to run, but the layout had changed. The doors were farther, the corridors longer. Panic bubbled inside me, but I forced myself to think. The shadow fed on fear, but hesitation and careful observation might buy me a chance to escape. I realized then that this was no ordinary haunting. Brandon Hospital was a predator, and I had become its prey. I inched toward the exit, careful not to make sudden movements. The shadow followed silently, gliding like a wraith, stretching impossibly around corners, observing my every step. The whispers grew desperate, almost pleading. "You cannot leave. The building remembers." A sudden metallic clang echoed through the hallway, and I froze, heart hammering. The shadow reacted instantly, condensing and stretching toward the noise, moving with fluid precision. I realized it was sensitive to sound, and that every movement, every creak of my boots revealed my location. I ducked into a side room, pressing my back to the wall, and tried to calm my racing heart. The room was filled with scattered patient files, overturned chairs, and broken cabinets. In the dim flashlight beam, the shadow appeared at the doorway, towering, featureless, limbs twisting unnaturally. It tilted its head, observing, patient and intelligent, as if weighing my next move. I whispered to myself, "It can't know fear if I don't give it." Holding my breath, I edged along the wall, moving as slowly as possible. The shadow remained at the doorway, waiting, a predator confident in its patience. I understood fully. Survival depended on outsmarting it, navigating a building that was alive and aware, and confronting a darkness that thrived on terror. Every step now mattered, and one wrong move could mean I would never leave Brandon Hospital alive. I had to move, and I had to think fast. The shadow was patient, but it wasn't omnipotent. I scanned the room for anything I could use to distract it, anything to buy myself time. My eyes landed on a broken metal tray, its edges jagged and sharp. I grabbed it and flung it toward the far end of the hallway. The clang of metal on the floor echoed violently, and the shadow immediately reacted, stretching toward the noise. I seized the opportunity and slipped through the side door, heart pounding, lungs burning. The corridors twisted and shifted subtly, as if the hospital itself were guiding the shadow and corralling me toward some dark purpose. I could hear the whispers growing fainter yet insistent, echoing like a chorus of predators. "You cannot hide. You cannot escape." Each step was a gamble. I had to stay calm, even as the building seemed to breathe, the shadows slithering along the walls and floors. I forced myself to memorize every door, every hallway, every faint reflection in broken windows, knowing that one misstep could allow the shadow to strike. Finally, I glimpsed the stairwell leading to the exit. It looked ordinary, but the shadows along the walls pulsed and twisted, stretching toward me as though trying to pull me back. I forced myself forward, knowing that the final confrontation was inevitable, and that my survival depended on wit, nerve, and sheer courage. The stairwell was my only hope. I ascended cautiously, each step echoing through the empty building. The shadow remained below, twisting impossibly, trying to anticipate my movement, stretching up as if it could reach me even here. The whispers surged, overlapping, almost screaming. "Do not leave. Belong to us." I reached the top floor and saw the exit doors ahead, bathed in faint moonlight streaming through the broken windows. Relief surged, but the shadow reacted instantly, compressing and stretching up toward me, its featureless face turning slowly, as though studying my fear. My adrenaline spiked, but I forced calm, taking deliberate, measured steps. I realized then that the building itself was part of it, guiding my path and testing my resolve. The shadow didn't need to chase me recklessly. It thrived on control, manipulating my panic, drawing strength from hesitation. I clutched the flashlight tighter, forcing my mind to focus on light, space, and escape routes. Finally, the exit doors were within reach. I pushed one open, the cold night air hitting me like a wave, breaking the oppressive weight pressing against my chest. The shadow recoiled slightly at the sudden brightness, writhing before vanishing into the darkness behind me. I stepped outside, trembling, lungs gasping. Brandon Hospital had let me leave, but the memory, the influence, and the whispering shadow would never leave me. I thought I was free, but the whispers followed me long after I left the hospital grounds. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the elongated shadow stretching impossibly through the hallways, reaching for me, and the twisted corridors of Brandon Hospital replayed in my mind like a living nightmare. The metallic scent, the oppressive weight, and the cold, intelligent presence of the shadow lingered in my thoughts. That night, I dreamed of the hospital. I walked its halls again, flashlight in hand, the shadow gliding along walls, whispering my name. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, pleading and mocking simultaneously. "You cannot escape. The building remembers." I woke with a start, drenched in sweat, convinced I could feel the shadow leaning over me, observing, patient, waiting. I realized fully then that Brandon Hospital wasn't just a physical location. It was a vessel, a sentient predator. And the shadow was its guardian, a manifestation of fear made real, feeding from those who dared to enter. I had survived, but its influence had reached inside me. I could sense it even in the daylight, lingering in every echo, every shadow, every creak in old buildings. I understood that some darkness doesn't stay contained. It follows, patiently, intelligently, waiting for the moment you falter. Weeks later, I returned to the site during daylight, just to prove to myself that it was over. The hospital stood silent, abandoned, broken windows staring like empty eyes. No shadows moved, no whispers called my name. The sun reflected off cracked tiles and peeling paint, and for a moment, relief washed over me. But as I turned to leave, I noticed the faint outline of a figure at the far end of the hallway. A subtle distortion in the shadows, limbs elongated unnaturally, tilting like it remembered me. The whispers returned, soft but unmistakable. "We are patient. We remember." I ran, not daring to look back, adrenaline propelling me through broken hallways and debris-littered floors. I understood then that the shadow didn't need to follow physically. Its influence lingered, embedding itself into the mind of anyone who encountered it. Brandon Hospital had taught me that some darkness is patient, intelligent, and eternal. It doesn't strike immediately. It waits, learns, and when the time is right, it returns. I survived the night in the hospital, but I carry the shadow with me still. Every echo in an empty corridor, every flicker of light, every unfamiliar shape reminds me. Some places are alive, and some darkness is never truly gone. My name is Liam Carter, and this happened during a solo hiking trip in White Shell Provincial Park. I had always loved the forest, the towering pines, the misty mornings, the sense of isolation. But nothing could have prepared me for what I experienced. It began innocently enough, with me following a rarely used trail that wound deep into the wilderness. The forest grew denser as I progressed. The trees seemed taller, the air heavier, and the light dimmer, as though the sun itself hesitated to penetrate the canopy. Birds had gone silent, and even the wind felt muted. I chalked it up to isolation, but a creeping unease settled in my chest. Something was off, unseen, yet undeniably present. I set up my camp near a small clearing beside a stream and tried to shake off the feeling. That night, as I sat by the fire, I thought I saw movement beyond the tree line. Shadows that didn't match the shape of the trees, shifting unnaturally. When I focused, nothing was there. Yet the sensation of being watched refused to fade. It wasn't until I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of soft footsteps in the underbrush that I realized I was not alone. The forest was alive, and whatever was in it was patient, intelligent, and unseen. Observing my every move, I froze, straining to hear over the crackling fire. The footsteps were deliberate, soft, but unmistakable. Something, or someone, was moving closer through the underbrush. My flashlight trembled in my hands as I scanned the darkness. Nothing visible emerged, yet the feeling of being stalked intensified. I whispered to myself, "It's just another hiker. Probably an animal." But instinct told me otherwise. The forest had changed. The shadows shifted unnaturally, and the air felt thick, almost pressing against my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, yet the trail back had disappeared. Then I saw it. A figure, pale and elongated, stepping silently between the trees. It didn't move like a human, yet its form was vaguely humanoid. Its eyes, if they could be called that, glowed faintly, reflecting the firelight as it studied me. My stomach churned, and I stumbled backward, tripping over roots and fallen branches. The figure didn't advance immediately. It seemed patient, waiting for me to make a wrong move. The forest was no longer a safe haven. It was a trap, alive and aware, and I was being hunted. I realized that survival wouldn't depend on speed alone, but on observation, strategy, and courage. I tried to remain calm, telling myself that I needed a plan. Every instinct screamed to run. But I knew that in this forest, panic would be fatal. The figure had not moved closer yet, but I could feel its presence, almost like a pressure in the air. It studied me, patient, intelligent, calculating my every reaction. I gathered my gear quietly, moving toward the direction I thought the trail would continue. The forest seemed to resist, shadows stretching unnaturally, roots shifting subtly underfoot, guiding me deeper rather than out. I realized then that this place wasn't just dense wilderness. It was alive in a way I had never imagined, aware of intruders, and willing to ensnare them. Suddenly, a branch snapped behind me. I froze. The figure had moved closer, its elongated limbs bending impossibly as it slipped silently between the trees. I could feel its gaze on me, even without seeing its face directly. My chest tightened as the whispers began, soft at first. "You cannot leave. You cannot hide." I gripped my flashlight tightly, its beam trembling as I tried to illuminate the darkness. The forest seemed to pulse with each step, alive and malevolent, a predator that did not need to strike immediately. It thrived on fear, hesitation, and confusion. I understood fully then that escaping this place would require not only courage, but cunning, as the forest had already begun to toy with me, shaping the path and testing my resolve. I moved cautiously, trying to memorize landmarks, broken branches, and the subtle changes in the terrain. Every sound, the rustling of leaves, the distant snap of twigs, made my heart race. I realized that my fear was feeding whatever haunted this forest. The figure remained just out of reach, patient, intelligent, and entirely in control of the environment. As I ventured deeper, the whispers became clearer, almost sentences. "You belong to the forest. It remembers your steps." My skin crawled as I realized that the trees themselves seemed to shift, rearranging subtly when I wasn't looking, funneling me toward areas where the shadow could observe and manipulate me more efficiently. I came across a small clearing and paused to catch my breath. Moonlight spilled across the ground, but the shadows were unnatural, stretching too long, bending in impossible ways. The figure appeared at the edge, limbs elongated, tilting unnaturally. And for a brief instant, I felt an almost human intelligence behind those faintly glowing eyes, as if it were testing me, gauging my courage, my fear. I knew then that the forest wasn't just a backdrop for horror. It was the horror itself, a living predator, and the figure was its agent. Survival meant understanding its rules, controlling my fear, and moving with deliberate caution. One wrong step, and I would vanish into whiteshell forest forever. I forced myself to move, every step deliberate, listening carefully to the rhythm of the forest. The figure did not chase me recklessly. It followed silently, gliding between the trees, watching, patient. The whispers grew louder, layering into a chorus that seemed to echo from every direction. "You cannot leave. The forest remembers." I stumbled upon a small stream and paused, realizing that water might be my only guide. Its gentle babble contrasted sharply with the oppressive silence elsewhere, grounding me for a brief moment. I traced it upstream, hoping it would lead me out, and the forest seemed to resist subtly, shadows stretching to obscure my path, roots tripping me, every natural obstacle somehow deliberate. Suddenly, movement caught my eye. The figure had repositioned, standing on a small rise, silhouetted against the moonlight. Limbs bent impossibly, tilting, twisting, but it did not approach. It was as if it were waiting for me to make a mistake, to panic. I understood fully then that this forest was a trap, not inanimate, but aware, shaping my path, testing my courage and wits. I gritted my teeth and pressed on, relying on logic over instinct, careful not to show fear. The whispers softened but remained omnipresent, watching, guiding, and reminding me that every step mattered. My survival depended on patience, control, and understanding that the forest itself was alive, patient, and merciless. I continued along the stream, moving as silently as possible. The figure mirrored me at a distance, every motion calculated, limbs unnaturally elongated, face featureless, but glowing faintly in the moonlight. The forest seemed alive, bending, stretching, guiding me toward unknown danger. At one point, I misstepped on a root, and the snapping sound echoed through the clearing. The figure reacted immediately, stretching across the forest floor like liquid darkness, tendrils of shadow reaching toward me. I froze, controlling my breath, refusing to panic, and after a tense moment, it retreated slightly, assessing, patient, intelligent. I realized then that the forest had rules. My survival depended not on speed or strength, but on observation, strategy, and restraint. Every movement had to be deliberate, every sound calculated. The whispers continued, now almost instructive. Move with care. We see everything. Eventually, I reached a narrow path leading uphill, faint traces of the trail illuminated by the moonlight. I gripped my flashlight tightly, focusing on the path rather than the shadows, refusing to acknowledge the figure's gaze. I understood that Whiteshell Forest was testing me, shaping my journey, and that one misstep would cost me everything. The forest was patient, the figure patient, and I had to be more patient still if I hoped to escape the unseen predator that watched my every move. The uphill path twisted unnaturally, the forest pressing in around me. Every shadow seemed alive, stretching, bending, testing my nerve. The figure remained just out of reach, patient and intelligent, observing my every step. My heart raced, but I forced myself to focus, moving deliberately, controlling each step as though it were a chess move against an unseen opponent. Suddenly, I glimpsed a faint light through the trees, a break in the canopy where moonlight poured in like a spotlight. Relief surged, but the figure reacted instantly, stretching and twisting as if to block me, its tendrils of shadow flicking along the ground like dark smoke. The whispers intensified, now urgent, almost pleading. You cannot leave. We remember your steps. I realized that the forest didn't need to chase me. It manipulated my mind, feeding on hesitation and fear, guiding me toward a danger while giving the illusion of escape. I clenched my fists and forced my mind to remain calm. Observing the figure's movements, I noticed a pattern. It advanced only when I panicked, retreated when I remained deliberate. Using this knowledge, I inched forward, careful, steady, and unafraid. Each step felt like defiance, a declaration that I would not succumb. The forest and its guardian were patient, but I had learned to be patient too, using logic over fear and hope over panic if I wanted to survive the night. The path narrowed, trees closing in, but I kept moving, deliberate and cautious. The figure mirrored my progress at a distance, limbs bending unnaturally, tilting in ways that defied physics. The forest itself seemed to pulse with malevolent intelligence, guiding me toward the clearing while testing my courage and composure. At one point, I paused behind a thick pine, holding my breath as the figure glided past. Its presence was suffocating, a psychic weight pressing on my chest, but I remained silent and still. The whispers overlapped, a chorus of unseen voices echoing. We see you. We know your fear. You belong to us. I understood then that the forest was not just a setting for horror. It was the horror itself, and the figure was its agent. My survival depended on observation, patience, and exploiting the patterns I had begun to notice. I moved again, calculating each step, listening for every sound, feeling for every subtle movement of the forest around me. Finally, the forest began to thin slightly, a faint glow of moonlight ahead suggesting an opening. The figure hesitated, stretching toward me, but it did not advance. For the first time, I sensed vulnerability in the malevolent presence. I realized that I had learned enough to outmaneuver the forest, but the final challenge, the clearing and ultimate escape, awaited me just ahead. The clearing finally appeared ahead, bathed in pale moonlight. Relief surged through me, but I knew better than to trust appearances. The figure remained at the tree line, its elongated limbs bending in impossible ways, tilting toward me, patient and observant. The whispers crescendoed, layered and almost human. "You cannot escape. The forest remembers." I hesitated only for a moment before stepping into the open, flashlight scanning the periphery. The figure did not advance, but I could feel its gaze pressing against me like a physical weight. The forest itself seemed to exhale around me, shadows twisting unnaturally along the edges of the clearing. Every instinct told me to run, but I forced calm, moving slowly, deliberately, and keeping my eyes on the figure at all times. Then I noticed the faint trail of light from the distant park boundary. The forest had tested me, pushing, observing, but its patience had limits. I realized that maintaining control over my fear was my greatest weapon. Step by careful step, I advanced toward the boundary, the whispers receding slowly as I approached safety. The figure remained still, as if acknowledging my resilience. A final reminder that the forest and its agent were patient, intelligent predators, always aware, always watching, and that some darkness was eternal, even if momentarily outmaneuvered. I finally crossed the boundary of the forest, stepping onto the familiar gravel path leading back to my vehicle. The figure did not follow, but I could feel its presence lingering in my mind, an imprint of dread that no sunlight could erase. The whispers had faded, yet I sensed them in every rustling leaf, every shifting shadow, a reminder that the forest's reach extended far beyond its physical borders. I collapsed into my car seat, hands trembling, breath ragged. The solitude of White Shell Forest had been deceptive. It was alive, patient, and intelligent, and it had tested me in ways I could barely comprehend. I had survived, but the memory of the pale figure and the shifting shadows haunted me. Even now, when I recount this story, I feel the forest's weight pressing against me, and I know that some darkness never truly leaves. It waits, patient and eternal, in the shadows, in the whispers, and in the corners of the mind, ready to return when fear is renewed. I learned an indelible lesson that night. The forest is not just a place, it is a predator. And those who enter alone must respect its rules, its patience, and its intelligence, or risk vanishing forever. My name is Sophie Reynolds, and I never believed in haunted houses. Until I spent a weekend alone at Manitoba Manor. I had inherited the old estate from a distant relative, and while the townspeople whispered warnings, I dismissed them as local superstition. I arrived on a rainy afternoon, the clouds hanging low and gray, the manor looming over the empty street like a shadow frozen in time. Inside, the house was grand but decayed. Dust coated every surface, cobwebs hung like delicate curtains, and the air smelled of mold and old wood. The floors creaked under my footsteps, echoing through the empty hallways. At first, I attributed the strange noises to the house settling, but as night fell, I began to feel an unsettling presence. By midnight, whispers filled the air, soft and indistinct at first, like conversations just beyond comprehension. Doors that I had closed hours ago were slightly ajar. Shadows moved independently of the candlelight, and I felt as though unseen eyes were tracking my every move. The feeling of being watched became suffocating, a cold pressure that pressed against my chest with each heartbeat. I realized that Manitoba Manor was alive in some way. Its history, its secrets, and its lingering spirits intertwined to create an intelligence that observed, manipulated, and haunted anyone who dared enter. That night, my disbelief in the supernatural shattered entirely. I explored further, moving cautiously through the manor's dark hallways. Every room told a story of abandonment. Broken furniture, faded portraits staring from the walls, and an oppressive silence that seemed to hum beneath the floorboards. The whispers grew louder as I ventured deeper, almost forming words. "Leave. We are watching." My pulse quickened, but curiosity pushed me forward. In the dining hall, a long table stretched before me, covered in dust, but faintly, I could see impressions where someone or something had sat recently. A chill ran down my spine, and I turned abruptly, convinced I saw movement in the corner of my eye. The shadow receded, but the pressure remained, a presence that seemed to breathe with the house itself. I tried to rationalize what I was experiencing. Drafts, my imagination, the weight of the inheritance. But it became impossible. Every room, every corridor, every glance at a mirror reflected something subtle yet impossible. Shadows that shifted unnaturally, shapes that didn't correspond to the furniture or walls, and whispers that seemed to respond to my thoughts. By the time I reached the second floor, I realized that Manitoba Manor didn't just house memories, it fed on them. The spirits, the history, and whatever malevolent force lingered here thrived on observation, patience, and fear. And I had become its newest subject. The night deepened, and the manor seemed to breathe around me. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant thud, felt amplified, echoing through the vast, empty halls. The whispers were no longer soft. They formed sentences, taunting and mocking me. "You shouldn't be here. This is ours." My heart pounded as I moved toward the master bedroom, the air growing colder with every step. The room was grand yet decayed, a once luxurious space now dominated by peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and a grand four-poster bed draped in tattered curtains. Shadows pooled in the corners, bending and stretching unnaturally, as though alive. A faint, almost imperceptible movement caught my eye. A figure, tall and featureless, shifting just beyond the candlelight. My breath caught in my throat. I forced myself to focus, gripping the flashlight tighter, illuminating the corners. But the figure never fully revealed itself. It didn't need to. Its presence pressed on me, intelligent and patient. A predator feeding on fear. The whispers now seemed to respond to my thoughts, growing louder when I hesitated, softer when I moved with resolve. I realized then that the manor had rules, unspoken, invisible, but deadly. Survival required observation, patience, and an unwavering mind. Panic would be fatal. I had to navigate this living nightmare carefully, understanding that the house itself was orchestrating every movement, every shadow, every sound to test me, to break me, or to claim me entirely. I moved slowly, each step deliberate, eyes scanning every inch of the room. The figure didn't advance, yet its presence was suffocating, bending the shadows around me as if the walls themselves were alive. I could feel a cold pressure at my back, urging me to turn, to run. But I forced myself to ignore it, knowing that hesitation would only strengthen whatever haunted this manor. A cracked mirror on the wall reflected the room, and for a fleeting instant, I saw multiple shadows behind me, elongated, contorted, and moving independently of any light source. My stomach churned, and I realized that the manor didn't just manipulate space, it manipulated perception. Reality and illusion intertwined, creating a living labyrinth of fear. The whispers became almost human, forming words I couldn't quite comprehend. "You are ours. You cannot leave. I shivered, the air growing icy, my breath visible in the dim candlelight. I understood that the manor's spirits, or whatever force lingered, were intelligent, patient, and eternal. I clutched my flashlight and advanced toward the adjacent hallway, forcing myself to move despite the oppressive dread. Every step required courage, every movement calculated, as I began to comprehend the true scale of the haunting. This house was alive, a predator with patience, intelligence, and a singular goal: to trap anyone who dared enter and never let them leave. I entered the library, a grand room lined with dusty bookshelves that stretched to the ceiling. The air smelled of mold and old paper, yet beneath it was something fouler, something that seemed alive. Shadows pooled in every corner, stretching across the floor as if reaching for me. My flashlight flickered, casting brief glimpses of shapes that didn't belong, elongated forms bending impossibly around the shelves. Then I heard it. A soft, deliberate tapping, like fingers drumming against wood. I froze. The sound echoed through the library, bouncing off walls, yet no one was there. My heart raced as the whispers grew louder, almost urgent. "You should not be here. We see you." I realized the house itself was aware of my presence, feeding on my fear, shaping my path, guiding me deeper into its maze. As I moved toward the center of the room, I glimpsed the figure again, a pale, featureless shadow, taller than any human, gliding effortlessly among the bookshelves. Its presence pressed against me, intelligent and patient, testing my resolve. I clenched my jaw and reminded myself to stay calm. Panic would be fatal. Every instinct screamed to flee, but I forced myself to observe, to understand, and to move carefully. The manor thrived on fear, but I would not give it the satisfaction. I realized that knowledge, courage, and precision were my only tools against the ancient malevolence that haunted Manitoba Manor. I edged toward a grand fireplace at the far end of the library, where a faint glimmer of moonlight filtered through a cracked window. The shadows seemed to ripple as I approached, bending unnaturally, almost alive. The figure remained just beyond the light, patient, watching, and I could feel the weight of its awareness pressing down on me. Suddenly, a book fell from the top shelf with a loud crash. I jumped, my heart hammering. The figure didn't move, but the whispers escalated, swirling around me like a storm. "Do you see? Do you understand? This is ours." I realized then that the manor was testing me, pushing me to panic, to lose control. Survival required restraint, observation, and understanding the house's intelligence. I gripped the flashlight tighter, scanning the room, trying to anticipate its movements. Every shadow, every flicker of light was a clue. Slowly, deliberately, I maneuvered past the figure, keeping it in my peripheral vision, ensuring that I did not provoke it. The house seemed to breathe with me, alive and intelligent. Every step a calculated test of my courage and composure. By the time I reached the door at the opposite side of the room, I felt a momentary surge of hope. The manor had been patient, the figure had been patient, and now it was my turn. One final push, and perhaps I could escape its relentless grip. I stepped through the library door and found myself in a long corridor lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow me. The air was icy, pressing against my skin, and the whispers had become a chorus of hissing voices. "You cannot leave. We know your fear." Every instinct screamed to flee, but I moved deliberately, forcing myself to remain calm. The manor's intelligence was testing me, measuring my courage, my control, my awareness. Ahead, I glimpsed the figure again, pale and featureless, its elongated limbs tilting unnaturally as it glided along the corridor. Shadows pooled around it, stretching and twisting, reacting independently of the light sources. The house itself seemed to pulse with each of its movements, the walls narrowing and expanding subtly as if alive, a living labyrinth designed to ensnare the unwary. I clutched the flashlight tightly and advanced, each step a calculated defiance. The whispers seemed to respond to my pace and posture, ebbing and surging as though observing my every thought. I understood that panic would be fatal. Only calculated courage could carry me through this nightmare. As I approached the staircase leading to the attic, I felt a strange shift in the air, a momentary pause in the malevolence, as if the house and its guardian were acknowledging my resilience. The final confrontation loomed, and I braced myself for what awaited above. The attic door loomed at the end of the staircase, its surface cracked and warped with age. I hesitated briefly, listening to the chorus of whispers swirling around me. You belong to us. You cannot escape. I swallowed my fear and pushed open the door, stepping into the attic, which was illuminated by moonlight seeping through broken shingles. The attic was a chaos of forgotten furniture, old trunks, and decayed remnants of a life long gone. Shadows clung to every corner, bending unnaturally, and in the center of the room, the figure stood waiting. Taller than any human, featureless, limbs twisting in impossible angles, it seemed both patient and omnipotent. My breath came in ragged gasps, yet I forced myself to remain calm, knowing that panic would only feed the malevolent intelligence that haunted this place. I scanned the room, looking for exits, for clues, for anything that might give me an advantage. The figure did not move, yet its presence pressed down on me, a weight of awareness and intent. The whispers became almost tangible, surrounding me, probing, assessing. I realized that the manor had led me here deliberately, orchestrating every creak, every shadow, every whisper to bring me to this point. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, every muscle tense, prepared to confront the unseen intelligence and escape its relentless grip. The attic seemed to close in around me, shadows stretching unnaturally, bending toward me like dark fingers. The figure remained in the center, silent and patient, its elongated limbs tilting in impossible angles. A sentinel of the manor's malevolent intelligence. The whispers surged into a deafening chorus. You cannot leave. We are eternal. You belong here. My chest tightened, and I felt the full weight of the house pressing against my mind. I forced myself to breathe, to observe rather than panic. Slowly, deliberately, I moved toward a side window, the only potential exit I could see. The figure's attention shifted slightly, tilting its head, but it did not move. I realized then that the house thrived not on violence, but on fear, on hesitation and loss of composure. Every shadow, every whisper, every shifting shape was a test. I focused on logic, moving deliberately, maintaining eye contact with the figure through the moonlight. Step by step, I inched closer to the window, my resolve hardening. The house was intelligent, patient, eternal, but I had learned to play by its rules. Courage, observation, and composure were my weapons against the darkness. As my hand reached the window latch, I felt a final pressure, a psychic weight, almost like the figure's consciousness brushing against mine. I ignored it, took a deep breath, and prepared for the leap that could finally grant me freedom from Manitoba Manor's relentless grasp. I pushed open the window and climbed onto the narrow ledge, the cold night air biting at my skin. The figure remained inside, silent, motionless, but its presence lingered, pressing against my mind like a weight I could not fully escape. The whispers had faded, but left an echo, a memory of the manor's awareness. I descended carefully, each movement deliberate, and finally dropped to the ground below. The air outside the manor felt warmer, freer, yet I could still sense the lingering intelligence of the house, watching, patient, eternal. I ran without looking back, my heart hammering, adrenaline fueling my flight. The manor loomed behind me, dark and silent, but the feeling of being observed remained, etched into my mind. I reached my car, collapsing into the seat, hands shaking, tears streaming. I had survived, but the memory of the pale figure, the twisted shadows, and the intelligent whispers haunted me. Manitoba Manor was alive, patient, and eternal, and I knew that it would continue to observe anyone who dared enter. Even now, years later, I feel its presence in quiet moments, in shadows at the edge of my vision. The manor had tested me, shaped me, and left me with a lesson I would never forget. Some darkness is eternal, and some houses are predators that never truly release their prey. As the night draws to a close, we leave behind the frozen forests, abandoned farms, and haunted manors of Manitoba. Yet the shadows linger in our minds. Each story we've shared tonight, from the vanishing in Whiteshell Forest to the relentless malevolence of Manitoba Manor, reminds us that darkness is not always distant or imagined. Sometimes it waits silently, patient, observing, and feeding on fear. These tales are not myths or campfire exaggerations. They are real, documented encounters from ordinary people who found themselves in extraordinary horror. Places where the natural and supernatural intertwine, and where survival depends on courage, composure, and understanding the unknown. The forest, the manor, the abandoned houses, they are alive in ways we cannot fully comprehend, and they remain forever etched in the memories of those who dared to face them. Tonight, we glimpsed the unseen, heard the whispers, and walked the paths that few have returned from. As the moon casts long shadows over Manitoba's small towns and forests, remember that some darkness never truly leaves. It waits, patient and eternal, in corners, in shadows, and in the mind. Thank you for joining me on this journey into fear. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.